I never meant to meet him twice. The first time he came into the gallery just before noon, sunlight spilling across polished floors, catching the gold threads of his hair as he stood before one of my pieces. I remember thinking he didn't look old enough to afford anything hanging on these walls. Yet he watched each painting like he was trying to memorize it. When he finally turned to me, there was something disarming about how directly he looked. No hesitation, no arrogance, just the clear gaze of someone who had already made up his mind. "You painted this?" he asked, pointing to a canvas bathed in light and shadows, an abstract self-portrait, if I were honest. "Yes," I said simply. He nodded once, the faintest smile curving his mouth. "I'll take it. No questions about price, no small talk. Just certainty." It threw me off balance in a way that felt almost intimate. Later, when I saw his name on the invoice, Julian Ward, 24, independent collector, it lodged somewhere in my mind and refused to leave. We met again when he came to collect the painting himself. I usually arranged deliveries, but he'd insisted on picking it up in person. I told myself it was harmless curiosity, that I only wanted to see if he'd look the same in daylight. He looked better. He wore a black shirt, sleeves rolled up, the top button undone, just enough to suggest ease rather than effort. There was a warmth about him, something open yet contained. "You said this piece was about light," he began, glancing at it as my assistant wrapped it carefully. "But there's something hidden in it, something private." I met his eyes. Art always is. It's what we hide that draws people in. He held my gaze longer than he should have. Then maybe that's why I bought it. Something in me stilled. The way he said it, not playful, not bold, just honest, and too close to the truth. I turned away, reaching for the paperwork. "You'll get the certificate of authenticity with the piece, and if you ever plan to resell, please contact the gallery first." He smiled faintly. "I don't plan to." For days I tried to forget the encounter. I've built a life on composure, curated it like one of my exhibitions. Control has always been my armor, but when I paint, that armor cracks, and I suspect he saw through it. 2 weeks later, a message arrived on my professional email. "Your work feels like déjà vu. Would you ever consider letting someone watch you paint? I promise I'll stay quiet, no signature." But I knew. Against my better judgment, I typed back, "I don't work with an audience. It disrupts the process." He replied within minutes. "Disruption can be beautiful too. I should have ignored it." Instead, I stared at the screen far too long before closing the laptop. He came to another gallery showing 3 weeks later. I didn't invite him, but I knew he'd come. It was an afternoon exhibition, sun pouring through glass walls, the city humming outside like a constant heartbeat. He stood near the center, hands in his pockets, studying a new piece, something I'd painted after our last meeting. My assistant whispered that he was a collector, that I should greet him. I pretended not to hear, but when I finally crossed the room, his attention shifted to me as if he'd been waiting the whole time. "Another self-portrait?" he asked softly. "Every painting is in some way." He smiled. "Then you must be everywhere." It was the kind of line that would have felt rehearsed from anyone else. But his tone wasn't flirtatious. It was reverent, almost bewildered. We talked for a while, surrounded by light and color. About technique, about texture, about how art can both reveal and conceal. Each word felt measured, but every silence between us felt louder. When his fingers brushed mine as he gestured toward a frame, I froze. It wasn't an accident. It was a question. He didn't move away. Neither did I. Later, as the crowd thinned, he found me by the tall windows overlooking the street. The light had shifted to late afternoon, gold and warm, touching everything it could reach. "I've been dreaming about your work," he said quietly, about the woman behind it. The confession hung between us, soft and dangerous. "You're too young to be saying things like that." "Too young for what? To feel something real?" His voice carried no arrogance, only conviction. I should have ended it there. I should have reminded him of boundaries, professionalism, the difference between admiration and obsession. But something inside me betrayed the script. "You don't know me," I said. "I think I do," he murmured. "At least the part of you that still paints what she can't say." It hit deeper than I expected. For a second, I forgot where we were. The gallery faded, the noise, the chatter, the scent of polished wood. And there was only sunlight, his voice, and the steady pulse under my skin. "You should leave before I start believing you," I managed, forcing a smile. He looked at me for a long moment. "You already do." That night, I couldn't sleep. My studio glowed faintly with the reflected lights from the city outside, the air smelling faintly of turpentine and coffee. I tried to work, tried to lose myself in color, but every shade I mixed came out wrong. His face kept intruding between brushstrokes. His words echoed, "The part of you that still paints what she can't say." I realized then that I hadn't painted for him. I'd painted because of him, because he saw something in me that I'd buried long ago. 2 days later, I went to deliver a piece to a private buyer in the same district where his studio supposedly was. Or at least that's what I told myself. It was an excuse, a rationalization. I could have sent someone else. I didn't. As I walked past a line of art spaces flooded with daylight, I saw him through a window, alone, arranging canvases. The black shirt again, sleeves rolled, collar open. He looked older this time, though maybe it was just the light. He noticed me almost instantly, as if he'd been expecting me. He stepped outside, the air between us bright and heavy. "I thought artists hated coincidence," he said softly. "I don't believe in coincidence," I replied. We stood there, the city noise around us fading. He reached out, not to touch, just to close the space between us with something wordless. "I didn't mean to make things complicated," he said. "You didn't," I lied. But when our eyes met, the lie shattered. It wasn't harmless anymore. I told myself I wouldn't see him again, that what happened at the gallery was a line crossed in silence, nothing more. But denial has a way of unraveling, thread by thread, until the whole thing comes apart in your hands. It began with his message, short, unassuming, but pulsing with everything left unsaid. "If you ever want company while you paint, I'll bring coffee and stay quiet." I stared at it for an hour before replying. "Coffee only, no conversation," he responded with a single word. "Deal." He arrived the next morning. The studio was flooded with sunlight, the kind that makes everything look sharper. The gold edge of the easel, the tiny flecks of dust in the air, the faint sheen of sweat at the base of his throat. I kept painting, pretending not to notice how the rhythm of my brush faltered whenever he moved. He didn't speak. He simply watched, sitting near the window, the coffee cup untouched beside him. After a while, I could feel his gaze tracing every movement I made. How I leaned into the canvas, how strands of hair slipped from my bun, how the hem of my linen shirt brushed against my thigh when I shifted. The silence became a language of its own. Finally, I said, "You're distracting." He smiled faintly. "You said no conversation. I'm obeying. You're not." "I'm trying. Try harder." "I am." And there it was again. That subtle defiance. That quiet refusal to play by my rules. I turned toward him then, brush still in hand, the scent of paint thick in the air. "What do you see?" I asked. He hesitated, his eyes moving over my face like a slow exhale. "Someone pretending not to feel anything." The words hit deeper than I expected. "And what makes you so sure?" "Because I've been doing the same." We didn't speak much after that. But something shifted, something irreversible. Each morning he came again, always with coffee, always quiet. Sometimes he brought new brushes or paints, things I didn't ask for but always found myself using. Sometimes he said nothing for hours, just sat there, sunlight softening his features, until I forgot where the art ended and he began. The distance between us shrank in ways neither of us acknowledged. When he stood behind me to hand me a brush, his fingers brushed mine, lightly, deliberately. The sound of his breath close to my ear sent something unsteady through me. "Too close," I murmured once. "Then tell me to move," he said. I didn't. That afternoon I caught his reflection in the window. He was looking at me the way artists look at their subjects, hungry to understand, but unwilling to disturb what they see. "You're studying me," I said, still painting. He smiled. "You do the same to me every time you pick up a brush." "I study colors, not people." "Then maybe I'm the exception." I laughed softly, but my heart didn't believe the deflection. "You're too sure of yourself." "No," he said quietly. "I'm sure of you." I didn't realize how much I wanted to be seen until he said it. Not admired, not adored, seen. And for the first time in years, I let the mask slip. We spent hours like that, him watching, me painting. The city hummed outside, traffic echoing like a heartbeat through the open window. I painted until my wrist ached and the air smelled of turpentine and coffee gone cold. When I finally stopped, the painting before me was nothing I'd planned. Strokes too raw, colors too alive. I turned toward him, breath uneven. "You did this," I said. He tilted his head. "You painted, but you're in it. You're everywhere." He stood then, walking closer. Sunlight spilled across the floor, cutting through the space between us. "Maybe it's because you've been in mine," he said softly. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The sound of the city blurred into something distant and slow. He reached up, gently brushing a streak of paint from my cheek with his thumb. His touch was barely there, but it lingered, long enough for me to feel my resolve tremble. "You shouldn't," I whispered. "Then stop me." I didn't. The next morning I woke early, restless. I cleaned the studio twice, rearranged the canvases, and told myself to get back to routine. But when he arrived, later than usual, hair tousled, sleeves rolled, sunlight catching the edge of his jawline, I knew it was too late for routine. He set the coffee down and said, "You're avoiding the painting." I finished it. "You're avoiding me. That too." He smiled, slow and knowing. "You're allowed to want things." "I want silence." "No," he said gently. "You want to stop pretending." It was a simple sentence, but it undid me. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe I reached for him, or maybe he reached for me. What I do remember is the nearness, the scent of paint, the roughness of his fingertips, the sound of breath between words we couldn't say. He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. The space between us was already burning with everything that had been denied. I felt his heartbeat against my hand when it brushed his chest. Warm, steady, real. For a second, I forgot the rules, the age difference, the unspoken risks. There was only the dizzying clarity of wanting and being wanted back. He looked at me like I was something rare, fragile, alive. "I keep dreaming about you," he said softly, "and every time you walk away before I can tell you why." "Why what?" "Why I can't stop thinking about you. I should have stepped back. I didn't. Instead, I whispered, 'Then don't.'" We spent the afternoon pretending to work. I painted, he pretended to read, but the silence was heavy with awareness. Every brushstroke became slower, every glance longer. When I dropped a brush and bent to pick it up, he reached the same moment, our fingers meeting over the wooden handle. Neither of us moved away this time. The sunlight poured over us, bright and relentless, and I felt the world narrow to this. His skin, his breath, his quiet restraint. He said my name once, almost like a question, and I answered without words. When evening came, he lingered by the door, hand resting on the frame. "I don't want to make this harder for you," he said quietly. "You already have," I admitted. He hesitated, then smiled with something tender, almost sorrowful. "Then maybe I'll make it worth it." He left, the door closing softly behind him. That night, I sat alone in the studio, the city still glowing outside, the half-finished painting catching the last of the light. My hand trembled as I traced the edge of the canvas. It wasn't just a portrait anymore. It was a confession. Each color was a breath we hadn't taken, a word we hadn't said. Every stroke was the tension of restraint. And in that silence, I realized something undeniable. Whatever this was, it had already changed me. The control I'd clung to, the distance I'd built. It was all dissolving under the warmth of something I'd tried not to name. Desire wasn't the danger. Feeling was, and I was already too deep to escape it. I didn't see him for 2 weeks. At first, I told myself it was a relief. I needed space, to think, to breathe, to remember who I was before him. But space only makes silence louder. Every morning, the studio felt emptier. The sunlight still poured through the windows, but it fell differently, as if missing something. I tried to paint. Nothing came out right. Every canvas blurred into the same hazy ache. It wasn't inspiration that I'd lost. It was balance. When a critic came by to preview my new work for an upcoming exhibition, she studied one unfinished piece and said, "There's hesitation here. It's like you're holding back." She had no idea how right she was. That night, I walked through the city until dusk turned to gold and the streets glowed with late sunlight. The air was warm, humming with life. I passed his street twice before I admitted what I was doing. He was outside, leaning against the doorway of his studio, phone in hand, looking up just as I slowed my pace. The look on his face was quiet relief, the kind that doesn't need words. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. I wasn't sure either. He smiled, small and careful, as if afraid to break the moment. "Do you want to come in?" I hesitated, but the truth was, I already had. His studio was a mess of light and life. Canvases stacked against white walls, jars of brushes, sunlight bleeding across the wooden floor. It smelled like linseed oil and something faintly citrus, maybe the soap he used. He poured coffee for both of us, setting the cups between scattered sketches. "You stopped painting," he said softly, not asking, just knowing. I tried. Nothing looked honest anymore. "Maybe that's because you're trying to paint around the truth." I looked up, meeting his gaze. "And what's that?" He leaned closer, elbows on his knees, voice low and steady. "That you feel something you're still trying to name." I should have deflected. Instead, I said the words that had been living in me for weeks. "I haven't felt this alive in years." His breath caught, just slightly. "Then don't call it wrong." I stood, pacing to the window, trying to calm the tremor in my chest. Outside, sunlight stretched long across the rooftops, golden and soft. "I'm not used to this," I said. "Losing control?" "Letting someone in." He rose slowly, the floor creaking beneath his steps. "You don't have to lose control. You just have to stop hiding behind it." When I turned, he was close enough for me to see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It disarmed me. The same man who had always looked so sure, now holding himself back. He reached out, fingers brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. "You don't need to be careful with me." That was the moment I realized he wasn't the one chasing. I was. I'd been chasing the feeling he gave me, the mirror he held up that showed a woman I thought I'd buried under discipline and years of control. I let out a shaky breath. "You have no idea what you're asking." "Maybe not," he said. "But I know what it feels like to want something real." I closed the space between us. There was no hesitation this time, just quiet recognition, like we'd both arrived where we were meant to all along. No rush, no desperation. Just warmth, understanding. A connection that felt less like breaking rules and more like coming home to something I'd forgotten I was allowed to have. When he kissed me, it wasn't the reckless hunger I'd feared. It was steady, patient, reverent, like he'd been waiting not for permission, but for truth. For a moment, the world dissolved. The sound of traffic, the ticking clock, the hum of the city below. There was only sunlight, skin, and the quiet exhale of surrender. When we finally pulled apart, the air shimmered between us. He smiled. "You still look like someone pretending not to feel anything." I laughed, breathless. "And you still look like someone too young to know better." "Maybe," he said softly. "But maybe I just know enough to see you." We spent the afternoon in the golden calm that follows a storm. No tension now, only something tender, fragile, new. I painted again, and this time he didn't sit in silence. He talked. About art, about his mother's garden, about the first time he saw my work and felt like he was looking at a memory he hadn't lived yet. And I realized, for all my self-imposed solitude, I'd forgotten what it meant to share space with someone who sees. He didn't try to guide me. He didn't interfere. He just existed beside me, quietly shaping the air between us into something safe. When I stepped back from the canvas, sunlight hit it perfectly. 2 figures, abstract and luminous, standing in a wash of gold. "It's us," he said softly. "No," I replied, smiling. "It's light. It's what's left after everything else burns away." Weeks passed like that. Slow, bright, uncomplicated. The world outside still whispered its judgments, but neither of us cared. People talked, of course. Gallery circles always do. A woman my age, an artist, and her young collector. But their curiosity couldn't touch what we had built. He came to every new opening, never drawing attention to himself, never claiming me. Just being there. When one critic asked if my latest series was about love, I said, "It's about rediscovery." And for the first time, I believed it. One morning, he found me sketching near the window, sunlight painting gold across my skin. "You're smiling," he said, half teasing. "I am?" "Yeah, it's rare. Looks good on you." "Don't get used to it. I already have." He came closer, resting his chin lightly on my shoulder. The warmth of him was grounding, his presence unhurried. "Do you ever think about what people will say?" I asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I think about how it feels when you look at me like I'm the only one in the room." And I stopped caring. I turned slightly, meeting his eyes. "You're too young to know what love costs." "Maybe," he said, his smile quiet. "Or maybe I'm old enough to know what it's worth." I leaned back into him, letting the moment stretch, soft and unguarded. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman measured by what she'd done or what she'd lost. I just felt alive. When he pressed a kiss to my temple, sunlight flooded the room, and I thought, this is it. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, just a choice. The choice to stop hiding from the parts of myself that still wanted, still hoped, still believed. Later, as we stood by the open window, the city below humming in the afternoon glow, he looked at me and said, "I used to dream about you before I met you." I smiled. "And now? Now I don't have to." I reached for his hand, fingers intertwining, the air warm and golden around us. Outside, the world kept moving, cars, laughter, life. But in here, time had stilled. The sunlight wrapped around us like a promise, and I realized the thing I'd been chasing all along wasn't him. It was the version of myself reflected in his eyes, fearless, open, unguarded. I had spent years painting light. Now, I was finally standing in it. If this story pulled you in, if you felt the heat beneath the restraint, the ache of unspoken connection, leave a comment below. Tell me which moment stayed with you, which line you couldn't shake. Don't forget to subscribe for the next Sunlit Confession. New names, new faces, new temptations waiting just beyond control.